For years, it seemed that The Walking Dead was a non-stop train of popularity and adoration from viewers around the world. With the highest rating and viewers coming at season 5, you'd think that this was the absolute peak of the show with absolutely no faults. And to some, it very much is, but for me, it has a few low spots in an otherwise fantastic season of television, and no episode showcases this better than the mid-season finale, Coda. During the 5th season, The Walking Dead started testing its audiences in a number of ways. The deviations from the comics were at an all-time high, making this adaptation seem like something else entirely. With new characters and plot lines that were made just for the show, things seemed to come to a head in this episode in a lot of different ways. We got some amazing character development for characters that weren't in the comics at all, specifically Daryl Dixon and Beth Green, but this plot ultimately cemented that the show's original plot lines didn't always work. Some of the risks they took didn't pay off, and until this point in the show, all of the risks that they did take seemed to pay off, so what made Coda so different? In this video, I'm going to be answering that question and analyzing the episode as a whole. While this might be a pretty great episode, it also spelled a certain doom in the years to come when it came to deviating from the comics. And I already know that this is going to be a controversial video. I've seen many comments asking me to cover this episode and its greatness, and from the title of the video, you already get the gist of how I feel about this particular episode, so allow me to explain why that is before you tell me I'm wrong in the comments, because I might be able to change your mind, or maybe and most likely I won't. So after you've watched the video and you still disagree with me, feel free to tell me your thoughts, because I might change my opinions if you come up with a good enough argument. But anyways, let's head to Grady Memorial Hospital, give a side character a prominent storyline just to kill them off, and let's discuss Season 5, Episode 8, Coda. We start out with Rick running and one of the police officers trying to escape. Rick gets in the police car and picks up the radio to tell him to stop running. He doesn't stop and Rick runs him down. He gets out of the car and the officer asks for help since his back is broken. Rick tells him that it didn't have to be like this, and the officer starts saying that he and his whole group has been out in the wild way too long, that they'll never make it, and Rick, quite literally, shuts him up.
Shut up.
Meanwhile, an injured Father Gabriel visits the old elementary school where the termites had their Bob dinner, and the walkers held inside the school break free. Gabriel runs back to the church, the walkers following closely behind him. When he gets there, Gabriel begs for Michonne and Carl to open the door as the walkers surround him, getting a taste of his own medicine, being left for dead, but Michonne and Carl open the doors to let him in, trying to hold off the walkers as long as they can, though there's too many of them and they're forced to retreat. Gabriel holds the door as Michonne, Carl, and Judith escape before he escapes too. The group goes around the opposite side of the church and locks the walkers inside. Rick returns to the group, discussing what he had to do with Daryl, and they discuss the plan about trading the captive officers for Beth and Carol. The other captive officers say that they'll comply with the trade and lie about how their fellow officer died. Switching point of views over to Beth in the hospital, she talks with Dawn about a man in a photograph who was supposedly Dawn's mentor, but she tells Beth about how he lost his way in the apocalypse and had to be taken care of. Back at the church, the walkers start breaking through the door when Abraham arrives with a fire truck and rams through the stairs to block off the entrance inside. Everyone gets out of the truck and reunites and exchanges information. Glenn says that Eugene lied about the cure, and Michonne tells Maggie that Beth is alive and in Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. Maggie is happy and relieved, and they plan on heading there to reunite with the other half of the group and get Beth back. Back at the hospital, Beth and Dawn are talking, and Beth says that this place that she's running is not that great, and Dawn brings up the fact that she saved Beth by covering the fact that Beth murdered another officer. Beth is surprised to hear that Dawn knew this, and we see that another corrupt officer heard this entire conversation. He threatens to tell the other officers about what Dawn is hiding and compares her to their old captain, Dawn's mentor, who lost his way. Dawn takes offense to this, and the two begin fighting, and when Beth sees an opportunity, she pushes the man down an open elevator shaft. Beth and Dawn continue talking, Beth saying that this place that she's running doesn't work because everybody just uses each other to get what they want. They're not actually looking out for each other. Dawn says that together they can make this place great, trying to take Beth under her wing. The group readies to go into the hospital when Tyrese and Sasha have a conversation. Tyrese tries comforting Sasha over Bob's death and tells her how one of the guys from Terminus at the church was a man who he had the opportunity to take out, but he didn't. He beats himself up over it, but he's had to look past it and become someone better. Sasha says that she doesn't think she could ever become somebody better, not anymore. Rick meets with 2 other officers, proposing a trade for Carol and Beth. The officers wonder where Rick's people are, and Sasha shoots an approaching walker. Rick says they're close and lets them radio to their commanding officer. The groups meet face to face for the first time, and the captive officers keep their promise and lie to Dawn about how the 3rd officer got killed. They get on with the trade, Carol for the 1st officer and Beth for the 2nd. Beth finally gets back to the group, and as they're walking away, Dawn says that she needs Noah back. Rick says that wasn't part of their agreement, but Dawn insists. Noah, not wanting to cause any more issues, says that he'll go back willingly. Beth gives him a departing hug, and Dawn says that she knew Noah would be back. This triggers Beth to make one of the worst decisions on the show and stabs Dawn with a pair of scissors. Dawn retaliates by shooting back. Everybody is stunned, but Daryl steps forward and takes out Dawn. Before a shootout happens, one of the previously captured officers calms everybody down, saying it was just about Dawn and no one else. She offers for them to stay, that they're surviving here and it's better than out there, but Rick says it's not, and he's taking anybody else who wants to come with them, though nobody steps forward. The rest of the group arrives, Maggie eagerly awaiting the sight of her sister, though when she does see her, it's wrapped up in Daryl's arms, and Maggie collapses to the ground. The group stands there, devoid of any hope, devoid of any home, and stranded in the city of Atlanta with nowhere to go. So the first 35 minutes of this episode are fantastic. We get some prime-time murder-beard Rick moments, a cool Walker fight, the reunion of groups, the conclusion to Beth's time with this horrible group of officers, and even a highly anticipated meeting between the hospital crew and Rick's group. But what ruins this episode entirely is Beth's death. But before I get to that, and believe me, I will, let's talk about the rest of the episode. While obviously the highlighted character of this episode is Beth, a lot of these big mid-season finales also focus on the protagonist of the show, and in this season, that was of course Rick Grimes. The opening of the episode with Rick chasing somebody down in a police car obviously reminds us of Rick's former job before the apocalypse, a police officer. Though with this scene, almost everything is reversed. The person who isn't a police officer, anymore at least, is chasing down the current police officer, and this kind of irony just reinforces how twisted and upside down this world is, and that was really one of the focuses during this stretch of the show. Even before Rick takes out the officer, he tells Rick that their group has been on the road for too long and they're not gonna make it, so Rick shuts him up and tells him to shut up, but this whole scene highlights how far Rick has gone from police officer to a wandering man doing what it takes to survive in the apocalypse. And later in the episode, when Rick is face to face with all of the officers, they offer for him and everybody else to stay because it's better than being on the road, but Rick says it isn't. So in a way, he really shuts the door on that part of his life, saying that there's no way he can go back to being that person, and that the world really has changed, but he'll take his chances out there in the wild instead of being with them. Rick also offers to take anybody else who wants to come with them, but nobody accepts the offer. Now, on one hand, this guy is a complete stranger. He looks like a complete maniac. I'm not sure I'd go with him if this was my first impression, but this offer still shows Rick's humanity. He sees ever so slightly what life is like in this hospital and how it's run, and he doesn't want that for his family. He takes his chances with the group on the road, hoping to find or stumble upon something better. Luckily they do, but it makes you wonder what life could have been like if they extended this plotline and had the group stay at the hospital for some time. Now, after the opening scene, we get this segment where Father Gabriel leads the walkers back to the church, and Michonne and Carl have to fend off the walkers until they get overrun. This whole part of the episode really feels like they needed to add a Walker fight because this was the mid-season finale. It's cool, it's what most people signed up for when they started watching a show about zombies, but ultimately seems like filler to pad out the runtime of the episode, which itself only clocks in at about 39 minutes. They also used this as a cool way for Abraham and the others to arrive, saving the day at the last moments, that way you could cheer and clap for the arrival of the characters. I'd say the redeeming part of this whole segment is actually Father Gabriel. Kinda. First, we see him get a taste of his own medicine, being locked out of the church and surrounded by walkers, and it seems that this jolts something in him, so when he's saved, he returns the favor by holding the door open until Michonne and Carl can escape with Judith. This seemed to be the first hint that Father Gabriel was changing, was becoming more courageous, and might even find a way to be part of Rick's group. And this very may well be the case, but this whole redemption of Father Gabriel is postponed until next season, because after this episode, Father Gabriel doesn't do anything like this again for the rest of this season. This episode really focused on wrapping up storylines and leaving very little room for things to go on. Even the things it was setting up, like Father Gabriel's character arc, are forgotten or postponed. When everybody reunites, they say that Eugene was lying and now they can all be one big group and go looking for Beth, leaving behind the church and really that whole Terminus/church storyline for good. And all of this makes sense towards the natural progression of the story, but what doesn't make sense is for the entire police officer storyline and Beth to come to an insane halt and never be revisited again. Throughout the past couple episodes, even dedicating an entire episode to this plotline, Beth has been at Grady Memorial Hospital with the leftover Atlanta police force. These officers have devolved into something very far from protecting and serving the community, and Beth has been looking for a means to escape. She's been developing this relationship with the villain Dawn, and things seem to come to a head in this episode. In the scene after she pushes the guy down the elevator shaft, Dawn reveals that she initially had higher hopes for this place, and in a real Emperor Palpatine kind of way, she tells Beth that they can build a better place together. Now, Dawn is one of my least favorite villains in the entire show. She doesn't have any redeeming qualities, and quite frankly, I was ready to see her go. But this conversation sets up what could have been an interesting plotline. Obviously, Beth wouldn't have wanted to stay and make this place better, but let's say that Beth survived this encounter, Noah returned back to the hospital, and the group continues on. The fact that Noah would be there and Dawn was still alive would have eaten at Beth much more so than any of the others because she knows what really happens there. These conversations about building a better place could have resonated with Beth, giving her an entirely separate plotline and making her a character of agency, wanting to go back for Noah and to liberate everybody else, maybe even take out Dawn. And I'm not saying that this would have all had to happen immediately. Maybe that's a storyline for season 6 or maybe even season 7, and the leftover police force, at least the good ones, join the fight against the saviors. There was so much potential for where Beth's character could have gone from here, because she was really only just starting to become an interesting character. But this was a mid-season finale, and around this time, the show was notable for big events only happening in episodes 1, 8, 9, and 16. There needed to be something big that happened so that everybody would be talking about the big shock or twist and hold everybody over until it came back, and because there was a need for a big death, the writers chose Beth. It seems to work out really great on paper. Beth was a character that wasn't in the comics, they didn't really know what to do with her, they came up with this whole side plot, and now they can get rid of her. Was this death shocking? Yes. Tragic? Absolutely. But was it necessary? No. But to the writers at this point, the death was absolutely necessary because it kept people talking. This was really one of the first major mishaps that The Walking Dead ever had, and it started a trend where the shock value of a scene or a character death was more important than the story being told. Starting from this episode, there was almost a big shocking moment or death in every episode that was 1, 8, 9, or 16. These shocking moments kept people talking about the show and increased the show's popularity through word of mouth, and this was what became important to the people in charge because this trend would go on to be abused time and time again. The season 6 cliffhanger, Carl's death, Jesus' death, these moments all came from an episode with a 1, 8, 9, or 16 attached to it. Carl and Jesus were both being set up to be major characters that were going to play big roles going forward. The cliffhanger really speaks for itself for what was a priority, and all of these decisions, whether they were good or bad, were deviations from the comic book. When you introduce new characters or plot lines that weren't in the comics, it can be pretty 50-50 for this show. You have someone like Daryl, who wasn't in the comics and eventually went on to be the main character, but you also have things like Carl's death that turned a lot of people away from the show. Beth's death, to me, falls under the category of the bad 50% decisions, which is ironic because Terminus is one of my all-time favorite arcs of the show, and that was a deviation from the comic story, or at least an alternation of it. But all of the show's questionable decisions when it comes to altering the story of the comics always makes me think of Beth's death because of how big of a missed opportunity and wasted potential her character felt. We spent the last 4 episodes focusing the story around Beth and the group coming to rescue her. There was a few other plot lines here and there, but we all knew it was going to come down to the group rescuing Beth. And for all of this buildup just for her to die right as they get there, it's not only a disappointment, but it's just plain bad writing. And I see all the time people try to defend decisions like this by saying, well, not everybody gets to have a character arc because this is the apocalypse and it makes it more unpredictable that way. Well, you know what else doesn't happen in the apocalypse? People showing up at the last second to save the day, and that happens like twice a season from here on out. It doesn't matter when, where, why your story takes place, there's story structure in any kind of story you've ever experienced. So when you spend 4 episodes looking forward to seeing a character, set up that character to go on an interesting character arc, and then take that away for the purpose of shocking your audience, it just doesn't sit right with me. Which is why I think that Coda was, to me, the most disappointing episode of The Walking Dead. Because we had never really seen anything like this before, and this started a trend in the show that would go on to lose a lot of audience members. But to end this video on a high note, the music in this episode is fantastic. I'm not sure how much I've used the track that's playing right now, but probably a lot because it's an amazing piece of music. I use it in a lot of my videos, even non-Walking Dead ones. It's just that good. Let me know why you agree or most likely disagree with my take on the episode. I'm not even a huge fan of the character of Beth, so I feel like I can look at this episode pretty objectively because I don't have any bias on the character. And I still feel like she was robbed of a story going forward. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.